Good afternoon, and welcome to this episode of the Ad Drop Podcast. Well, you know it's time to get smarter. You know him, you love him. He is the mayor of El Segundo, like the unofficial mayor of El Segundo, the pride of Cal State Northridge, and the managing editor of Last Word on College Football, Tony Siracusa. What's going on, Tone?
Hey, I actually looked up the El Segundo High School Hall of Fame, and of course, I'm not in it, nor should I be. Um, but I actually found some interesting people. Dawn Shaughnessy, Dawn, female. She is she graduated apparently about 4 years after I did, so that would be around 87 and is actually one of the leading nuclear chemists and radiation chemists in the entire country. How about that from little El Segundo?
Damn,
I,
that
I
is,
was pretty I was pretty impressed with that.
I mean, it's her, you, and a few guys who tried to play some baseball once upon a time.
Well, and I don't know if we talked about this. You know who Keith Erickson is, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, Keith Erickson is in the El Segundo High School Hall of Fame. He
wow.
went there. Yeah, he went there in the early 60s. Of course, went on to be an All-American basketball player at UCLA, but also went on to the 1968 Olympic volleyball team, um, and was an accomplished volleyball player. And then, of course, went on to become the color commentator for Lakers games, sitting next to Chick Hearn. But there are exactly 29 people in the El Segundo High School Hall of Fame. So the Brett brothers name some real pro football geeks like you are going to know. Bobby Beathard.
Yeah, the GM of the Chargers.
That's correct. And his brother Pete, who was a legendary football player at USC. And Daryl Cousins, who was a long
Umpire.
time major league umpire. That's right. His younger brother Craig, uh, was the assistant baseball coach at El Segundo. Gosh, I'm going to say for about 30 years, and a high school teacher there. And I'll throw one more out at you, completely off the sports realm again. James B. Sicking. That name
The
ring a
guy from Hill
bell?
Street Blues.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Was on several TV shows over the years, but yes, from Hill Street Blues, a member of the El Segundo High School Hall of Fame.
That is wild. Now, if we stay in LA, I want to discuss
Mhm.
the USC UCLA rivalry, but not just in football or basketball,
Okay.
but
Okay.
as a whole, because
hmm
I did some diving into UCLA baseball, and
hmm
I never realized how deep their baseball program is. I
hmm
mean, you got Troy Glaus. I'm sure that's a name that, you know, still ring, as a longtime Angels player. You got
You got always a favorite.
Garrett Cole,
hmm
guys like that. Now, when you look at the
hmm
rivalry, how would you compare it across different sports to like a Georgia, Florida, or a Alabama, Auburn,
hmm
which probably be like the closest comparison because they're so close.
Sure. I look. I think when you look at in Auburn, Alabama, it primarily has been a football rivalry up until the last couple of years. As the SEC has become so much more complete of a conference in basketball. It's not just Kentucky or a few schools. Alabama's played well. Auburn's played well. They had a great game, a couple of weeks ago at the end of the SEC season. The difference being with UCLA and USC is the two schools are about 12 miles apart. Um, they are, very much right there. They are next door neighbors, whether it's baseball, whether it's football, whether it's basketball. They are all recruiting historically the same guys. Even in USC's heyday, and actually USC's had a couple of heydays. If you want to look in the 70s under John McKay, you look, in the early 2000s under Pete Carroll, they were still recruiting local guys. Even they were while they were a national name, they were recruiting local guys. And there were some high schools that you just knew if you went to modern day high school, which I would encourage anyone to just Google the highest ranked high school football programs of 2024, or for any stretch of years. Modern Day is right there. It's a Catholic school in Orange County. It's a pipeline to USC, always has been. Long Beach Poly, which historically was a terrific high school football program in Long Beach, was a pipeline to UCLA. So these guys who they would be high school teammates, but now one's going to USC, one's going to UCLA, and they're bitter rivals. Or guys who were bitter rivals in high school have now come together in college. Um, the two schools hate each other. There really isn't any question about it. They couldn't be more dramatically different. You can paint a picture. USC is, wow, I haven't checked in probably a year, but about a 45 to $50,000 per year private school that, ironically enough, is in the middle of South Central Los Angeles. So, the students driving their high school graduation BMW onto campus through homeless people lends a great deal of irony to it. USC has one of the premier film schools in the country. George Lucas graduated from there. Their buildings are named after very wealthy people. UCLA is in the middle of one of the wealthiest areas in the country, but is a very inexpensive public school. You can go to UCLA as an in-state student because it's a state-run school for about $8,000 a year. But the campus is nestled right there next to Brentwood, Bel Air, and Beverly Hills. Um, it's very well laid out, and big grass areas and statue gardens and all of that. It's funny but it can't grow anymore. There's nowhere else to grow. There's nowhere else to expand. Right next to the campus is an area called the Westwood Village, which is a lot of restaurants and shops and things like that. There's nowhere for it to grow. There's always been the desire to have an on-campus football stadium at UCLA. There's nowhere to put it. And even if there were, even if you found space for a 50,000 seat stadium, bearing in mind they play at the Rose Bowl, which is a 92,000 seat stadium. But if you were to have a 50,000 seat stadium, there is no way that the fine taxpayers that are your neighbors in Beverly Hills and Bel Air would allow it to happen. The increase in traffic and all of that through their part of the neighborhood, there's no way. So it's a rivalry that has a lot of different elements to it, especially the week leading up to the football game. Um, there's a big bear statue right in the quad area that leads you to Pauley Pavilion and the football practice field and the LA Tennis Center and all of these other sports facilities there. The week of the game, they have to cover it with this huge crate and put guards around it 24/7 because it's been vandalized with cardinal and gold or red and gold paint in the past. There is the Tommy Trojan statue on the USC campus, which gets wrapped up in duct tape with 24-hour guards around it because there was the year UCLA, some UCLA fans rented a helicopter and flew over it and dumped manure all over it. Another year they did something similar and dumped blue and gold paint over it. It's funny because there's talk out here in the triad about, North Carolina and Duke, the bitter rivalry. And I'm like, were any of your statues defaced? Anything on campus found missing? Did anyone, deface your field, your football field? Because there was the year that someone got into the Coliseum and where it says USC in the middle of the field, they repainted things So then instead of USC, it said SUC. um, so look, man, if nothing got defaced or stolen, the two bands have a flag football game every year. The UCLA instruments got stolen from the truck one year, by USC people. Um, the student newspapers have what's called the Blood Bowl, which is their own flag football game leading up to it. They really don't like each other. I remember as a kid, and I've talked before about how my grandfather and I would go to the games every week. And you need to know UCLA played at the Coliseum back then. They shared the Coliseum with USC and with the Rams. So UCLA was basically the number three tenant there. There'd be games when the Rams logo was still there and the UCLA game was going on because they weren't going to have time to change it before the Rams game the next day. Um, so UCLA would play a lot of early Saturday nights because that was what they could get as the number three tenant of the Coliseum. But my grandfather would buy extra tickets for a family and bigger group for the USC UCLA game. And the USC fans, their tailgating was, this very lavish, linen tablecloth over the tables and champagne flutes and they would wear the women would wear these big corsages, but they were these huge flowers that were red and gold, and they would wear buttons that said God is a Trojan. The arrogance of the band for the really young people who don't know, when you listen to the Fleetwood Mac song Tusk, that is the USC marching band on the song performing with Fleetwood Mac. There was just this perceived arrogance about them. UCLA fans that have their blankets on the ground with their little chairs and their picnic baskets and for their food and their tailgating. The USC band would play and they'd wave their victory sign, and the UCLA fans would wave their car keys, indicating there was a rich boy school. There was just there's this long hatred. Um, some will call it envy, that UCLA fans were envious because they didn't have the history that USC had. But, they played for the Victory Bell, which was literally a bell from the old Southern Pacific Railroad locomotive that UCLA somehow got in like the mid 1930s. And now they play for it every year, and the winning school gets to paint the casing around the bell and everything like that. Um, One of the cool things actually that has happened with the football over the years is the that now both schools, whether the game's at the Rose Bowl or at the Coliseum, UCLA moved to the Rose Bowl. I'm going to say in 82 or 83, making it their home stadium. Both schools wear their home uniforms, by agreement. It looks very cool on TV. But to your point, when you go to the other sports, look, UCLA was a basketball school long before SC even thought about. Here's the thing, though. I talked to Bob Boyd one time, who was a longtime basketball coach at SC in the 1970s. And he actually was my grandparents' next door neighbor in Palm Springs when they retired. And I talked to him, and he had teams that were really good in the 1970s. They would only lose two games a year, but both of them were to UCLA. Now, picture as we're getting into March Madness here, things were different back then. There were no at-large bids for the NCAA basketball tournament. It was conference champions only. That was it. So it was a smaller tournament. You didn't have to win as many games, but you also weren't playing someone who got in because they got hot during the conference tournament and, got in as a 16 seed. These were only conference champions. So SC never made it because they had two losses every year to UCLA. They lost two conference games every year. And so the frustration level with some of the really good players that he had back then, Paul Westphal, Cliff Robinson, guys like that, not going to the NCAA tournament. Um, the UCLA, even in their down years, would claim superiority over USC for basketball for obvious reasons. UCLA is hanging 11 national championship banners in Pauley Pavilion. SC's not hanging anything at the Galen Center. And USC used to play in the sports arena next to the Coliseum, which was a total dump. But that's the Coliseum and the sports arena are right next to the USC campus. Um, Baseball, SC had a long, long legacy. Rod Dato was the baseball coach there. Had guys like Fred Lynn and Mark McGuire and guys like that. UCLA had a coach, Gary Adams, who was probably there, I'm going to say 22, 23 years and had some great talent over the years. Guys like Chris Chambliss from the Yankees and Torey Lovello and Troy Gloss and guys like that you mentioned. And he had two World Series appearances and was 2-out both times. They were 0-4. Um, they went and got John Savage. They kind of finally shoved Adams into retirement. I think he probably would have coached till he died. They finally shoved him into retirement, got John Savage, excuse me, from UC Irvine. UCLA has won the College World Series since then, um, had some really good talent, and has become a much better baseball school than USC is right now. USC is going through head coaches every 3 or 4 years now. But they get at it. There's been blood drawn in the pool and water polo matches. They get at it. They get at it pretty hard. So it's a great rivalry because when you lose and you're going to all the parties in your neighborhood at home, you're running into some of your crosstown rivals and you're going to hear about it. Like I said, with them being 12 miles apart and basically recruiting all the same players, whether it's basketball or football or whatever. Um, it's really very cool. John McKay used to there was a time when there were no scholarship limits for college football. You could build your roster as big as you wanted as long as you could afford to pay the kids scholarships. So John McKay in his heyday in the 1970s, and I'm talking guys like Lynn Swan and Pat Hayden and guys like that, J.K. McKay, Anthony Davis, he used to build up a roster of 130, 140 players. A lot of these guys never played 1 minute, but it was about keeping them away from UCLA. It was about, we're not going to let UCLA get them. We're just going to offer them. They'll sit, they'll get to be on a national championship team and have a ring and all of that. And, they'll live with it and they'll be fine. So it's been that kind of rivalry for a very long time. SC for a lot of years in the 70s really had it going on. I mean, look, and SC got known for running the offense was what they called student body right, which was basically a power sweep offense, behind huge offensive linemen, guys like Brad Buddy, who played a lot of years in the NFL. But to show you the kind of depth they had, 1979, Charles White, their tailback, won the Heisman. But USC with the student body right ran a power I offense. Now, for everybody under the age of 40 that listens to your show, it means there was a fullback in front of the tailback. Basically, that fullback would maybe carry 5 times a game, but was mostly there to block. And you may know this, but I'm gonna ask you anyway. Do you know who the fullback was when Charles White won the Heisman?
It's Allen.
And what Marcus freaking Allen was a fullback. College football and pro football Hall of Famer was getting about 5 carries a game for his first 2 years because he was just there to block for Charles White. That's the kind of depth they had. Guys like Ronnie Lott. I mean, it was they had rosters that were just extraordinary. UCLA started to catch up in the 80s, went through a period where they actually won 8 games in a row against SC. Of course, that was when SC had guys like Paul Hackett and Larry Smith, and the second iteration of John Robinson there. Um, but SC still has a pretty decisive margin in the rivalry. I think they're up in the rivalry by about 17 or 18 wins over UCLA. They had a pretty significant head start. I think UCLA didn't beat them for about the first 15 years they played against each other.
You know, it's weird. Like growing up, I always got it the opposite where I'm not sure who did the marketing for UCLA back then, but
Mm-hmm.
everyone on the East Coast thought, huh, UCLA is like in this really nice neighborhood. It's a
Mm-hmm.
really exclusive school to get into, and SC was kind of an afterthought. Yes, they were good in football, but when it came down to it, everyone knew UCLA top of their heads. Just even being in high school, I had
Sure.
people in my grades who they applied to UCLA. They had no
Mm-hmm.
thought about SC. That they didn't really have that kind of comprehension.
Yeah, and I can see that when all you're seeing is on TV. In Los Angeles, it was different. USC very much owned the town. Um, UCLA now is, I know because I get these emails, is the most applied college, the most applied to college in the country. They average over 100,000 applications a year with about an 8% acceptance rate. Um, USC, like I said, noted film school, good journalism school. UCLA was always known for its medical school. It feels like half the campus is part of the medical school, with one of the great hospitals on campus. Um, so yeah, I mean, they got their things they're known for, but when it comes to sports, the rivalry is ugly. I'll tell you a quick funny story about it. Um, when I got out of college, I was working for KNX News Radio. I think we've talked about a huge, huge, huge CBS radio station in LA. And Tom Kelly was the sports reporter for the station. You'd have sports twice an hour. Tom Kelly was the play-by-play guy for USC football on radio. Tom Kelly, there could not have been a bigger homer. You listen to a USC game on the radio in the 70s or 80s, and you'd never know there was another team on the field. It could have just as easily been a USC inter squad scrimmage because he wasn't talking about the other guys. But now I'm sitting there working a desk right across from Tom Kelly, and he was working on a VHS series because, yes, that's how long ago it was. We had VHS tapes on the history of USC football. And he was doing all these interviews with former players and things like that. And he'd come in and Siracusa, I talked to Mike Garrett and OJ today. What do you think about that? You guys don't have anybody that good. Never have. And this was a constant with him. And it was just that's just who he was. It was funny. The third, I think if I recall correctly, I actually used to have it. It was a 3 VHS tape series, and the last one was the history of the UCLA USC rivalry. And he said, "Yeah, I talked to some of you guys, but it was usually about your losses." And it was like, I'm at work as a news writer at a radio station, and it was still all about this rivalry because, there was Tom Kelly sitting right there across from me every freaking day. It was pretty funny.
I remember watching the Olympics and Olympic volleyball. Being from the East Coast,
Hmm.
beach volleyball wasn't a big thing, but like,
Sure.
huh? Every seemed like every other person on Team USA went to UCLA.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Karch Karai and St. John Smith and Mike Dodd and just legacy names like crazy, um, from UCLA, and they went on to, I think Al Skates, who was the men's volleyball coach for, gosh, I'm going to say about 25, 26 years, won 18 national championships while he was there. I mean, they were just dominant. They've won a few recently, over the years again. And there were a couple guys at SC who played and went on to a um, good beach volleyball career because in Southern California, that's where you made some money after you were done with your college career or the Olympics or whatever. You went on the beach volleyball circuit, and wasn't a lot of money at first. It is now, but it wasn't then. But they'd play, the Manhattan Open and the Cuervo Golden Hermosa and it was you'd see a lot of these guys who played against each other in college. There was a guy, it was funny. There was the two quick stories because I know we got other stuff to cover. But when I was young, like your son's age, and I played in a youth basketball league in Westchester, which was the city next to El Segundo, because we thought the competition was better, and so we played there. And the high school basketball players from Westchester High would referee the games. And we were, I think, Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings, something like that. And of course, high school basketball was predominantly Friday night. Um, and there was a guy who was a referee, very tall, played high school basketball at Westchester High. And I got a technical foul for mouthing off to him one time. And again, I'm, 8 years old, 9 years old. And I was encouraging my guys to step up the defense and be aggressive and whatever. And he told me, just settle down. That's what he told me. Settle down. It's a Saturday morning game. This guy was like not even making it up and down the court. He was so hungover from the Friday night parties after his high school basketball game that he spent most of the time leaning up against the wall, making calls on the other end of the court, from leaning up against the wall. And I literally told him, do your job so I don't have to. That guy was Tim Hovland, who became an All-American volleyball player at USC, who I would see numerous times in our adult lives together. So, once I told him the story, he was like, "I remember you. I think I teed you up one game."
It's funny when I look at when I think of rivalry, I'm like, I kind of like I said, I flash back to, being a little kid and watching different sports and
Sure.
hearing uncles debate because the UCLA game was always on in the background on a Saturday. It was like Saturday,
Mhm.
November. It was cold,
Third
but it was
Saturday of November. Always
in the
was third Saturday of November.
and we sitting there watching, and one of my uncles, he cheered for USC against USC. He cheered for UCLA against USC for two
Mhm.
reasons. In his mind, Arthur Ashe went there,
Sure.
Jackie Robinson went there.
Jackie Robinson, of course.
He couldn't name
Of
another
course.
player or just those two. He was like, that's good enough for me. And it just kind of stuck in that fandom where it might be like, I mean, they're 12 miles apart and
Mhm.
it's super close. And it's just to see how the two schools will continue to turn out like talent where being a Carolina guy, Carolina football has been down for the longest time. And basketball will have 1 or 2 years, but then has been down for the longest time as well. And to just
Sure.
see that constant talent, not just from the area, but they're like a national recruiter.
Well, if you look, it's interesting because you mentioned when they were in college, Jackie Robinson was from Pasadena. He went to Pasadena City College for a year before transferring to UCLA. And this was when he got out of the military. Jackie Robinson was a four-sport letterman. Can you imagine trying to do that in this day and age? He played football, he played basketball, he played baseball, and he ran track. I don't know how in goodness name you do that. I actually, in my memorabilia collection, have a vintage Jackie Robinson basketball card in his UCLA uniform.
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, he did it all, and the baseball stadium is named after him. It's funny when Arthur Ashe got sick, when he was HIV positive and then got sick, and they were naming stuff at UCLA. He made sure he did not want an athletic facility named after him, even though he was such an elite tennis player at UCLA. He donated a bunch of money to the school, and the Student Health Center is actually named after Arthur Ashe on the UCLA campus because it was what he wanted. It was important to him to be a facilitator for all students, not just the athletes. Um, Jimmy Connors was a tennis player at UCLA. The current UCLA women's tennis coach, who we got to know really, really well. She had UCLA. She had our daughter work out with the team when our daughter was like 11 as an up and coming USTA player. Is Stella Sampras. It's
Oh,
Pete's sister. And Pete never went to college. He went straight to the professional tennis circuit out of high school and out of uh, being at a tennis academy. But Stella played at UCLA, and she's got a couple national championships as the UCLA women's tennis coach. Um, so a lot of legacies that go through there, and like I said, the beauty of it is the two schools really do hate each other,
that's the
and the
best part
fan
of
and the
sports.
fan bases really do hate each other.
And that's the best part of sports. Now we take a quick turn.
Mhm.
Georgia, the University of Georgia football, where it seemed as though after they went back to back with national championships, I thought that we would be in an era of constant Georgia dominance through,
Mhm.
be it the NFL, to the transfer portal. The last couple of years, they've had excellent seasons, but not by Georgia standards. Do you think that because of the portal and because of the money that has been thrown around, that they kind of came back to the rest of the pack, or have the last couple of years been sort of an anomaly?
I think we need to reassess what our expectations are in the current day and age. In a 12 team playoff, where look, you got to the playoffs before and you had to win two games, right? Because you had four teams in the playoffs. It's a lot harder now. The season is a lot longer. Certainly, NIL, the collectives for better or for worse, and the upcoming revenue sharing really tend to even out the playing field quite a bit. So, look, I think Kirby Smart continues to do a great job recruiting. Um, Come July, we'll start to expect to, as they get ready to open camp, we'll start to monitor the arrest record of his players as closely as we do the progress of the players on the field. But hey, look, he's a good recruiter, he's a good coach, but I don't know that you can have a dominance anymore to the level of what we are starting to expect with Georgia. In other words, making the playoffs, winning the national championship at least every couple of years for Georgia back-to-back years, or Alabama fans certainly have grown to expect that. It's a different landscape. And I think it's more a matter of it's not so much a negative on Georgia that they have slipped. I think that the new world order and the new format has allowed the rest of the world to, if not catch up, at least close the gap.
I agree. When you look at just the competition level in the SEC, even the middle team like Auburn have started to stack talent. Even
Mm-hmm.
Florida, who's been kind of in the middle, also starting to stack talent, where
Mm-hmm.
it says more about their emergence in the decline of Georgia, I think.
I no, I totally agree. The if you are a school, if you're an SEC school, chances are you're going to spend. Remember, the cap for the revenue sharing is $20.3 million for the upcoming year. I imagine everybody shy of maybe Vanderbilt and Arkansas, maybe Mississippi State, spending that money all the way to the cap. Are they going to spend it all on football? No, they're going to put some towards basketball, and certainly some baseball because the SEC is very deep when it comes to good baseball programs. But the predominance of it is going to be towards football. And so you're going to get a lot more balance up and down than what you had before. Texas being in there now makes a difference because Texas is going to spend the money on football. So I really don't think it's a downside to Georgia that they were trending down after a couple of really great years. I just think that the new world of what we're seeing in college football has allowed others to close the gap. That's still the look, Georgia's still a top 10 team every year. They're going to be for the foreseeable future. Their talent base is extraordinary. Just ask the Philadelphia Eagles every draft day. I would imagine the Philadelphia Eagles will be camping out at the scouts will be camping out at Georgia spring camp this month also. Um, so the talent is there, but it's not overwhelmingly decisive over the other schools in the SEC, or the Big 12 or the Big 10 the way it was before.
Uh, when we look just kind of just keeping across the spread of football, the
Mhm.
Big 12 has decided to add or play 10 of their games on Friday nights, following suit with the Big Ten and the smaller schools that play on ESPN on Fridays. Is this a good thing, a bad thing, or is yet to be determined?
I hate it. And while you mentioned smaller places, the ACC added one more Friday night game this week. They're now up to 11 Friday night games. The Big 12 has 10. I hate it. I hate it because I hate it for really selfish reasons because as you know, my schedule, my clock is about 65 to 70 hours a week during the season. And I try to shut down Fridays, like late afternoon, let my editors take over the site for the rest of the night with the promise they won't fire any of the writers and won't crash the site. And kind of give them the wheel so I can go out with my wife and have dinner or go to a movie or something, right? So, but now you got these Friday night games, and I'm like, ugh, it means I'm gonna have to record something and watch it, at 2 in the morning when I'm awake or whatever. But the other thing is, it obliterates high school football. And I hate that. We've already had conversations about how the transfer portal and these guys getting their waivers for a sixth year or seventh year, um, based on playing in junior college before or based on the COVID year or whatever the case may be. It's already eliminating high school players as viable prospects at FBS schools, and that it's more about the portal than it is about signing day at this point. So the high school kids are already taking a beating in this new process, and I hate that. This makes it even worse. I mean, do we really need to put Wake Forest against Delaware State on a Friday night on the ACC network or Kennesaw State? Come on, man. Play it on a Thursday or whenever. Leave Friday nights alone. I mean, I know when you grew up and when I grew up, we had, Friday was high school football night, Saturday was college, Sunday was the pros. And then there was more money to be made, and we had Monday night football, and nobody was going to argue with that because that was a great thing to have a game on a Monday night. Then college football started expanding so that the MAC or Conference USA or whatever was playing games on Thursday nights, or now we got on Wednesday nights. And I'm okay with it, but I hate what this is doing to high school football. Give high school football Friday night and leave it alone.
Agree. It takes away from the specialness of the activity, and
Mhm.
I think the only place where I don't think it'll have an effect is Texas, where they spend way too much money on those stadiums to sit there and watch Baylor play Incarnate World. It just doesn't
They've
really fit
got
that way.
half the high schools in Texas or half the school districts have bigger and better stadiums than half the schools in the MAC or Conference USA anyway. They spent more money on them.
Exactly. They were talking to Max Crosby. He went to Eastern Michigan and he played high school football in Texas. And when he went to Eastern Michigan, they asked him what was it like in playing in front of a big crowd. He's like, I played in front of a bigger crowd in high school.
Right.
And
Exactly.
stats were right. He played in front of about 15,000 people at Eastern Michigan. He played in front of 16,000 people in high school. It's where these conferences need to kind of pull back a little bit. Less is more sometimes.
Yeah,
And
that's definitely true. And it's just you don't need it. There's plenty of other places to put the games. I mean, again, you do it on a Friday night, and I get it because then the network, whatever network it's on, has that exclusive window for a Friday night because there are only a couple of games or only a handful of games. But again, do you really need Wake Forest versus Kennesaw State to be on in an exclusive window? Does it really matter? It doesn't, no one's going to watch it anyway. So it doesn't matter if it's exclusive or not.
exactly. And speaking of, I mentioned Baylor. Dave Aranda sits at 31 and 30. He is coming off an 8-win season. Baylor was ranked 19th in offense last season. What must he do to kind of either earn an extension or keep his job?
Well, look, I think going into the season, going into 2024, Dave Aranda was one of the names that we were putting at the top of the hot seat list, right? Um, there were a handful of guys, Billy Napier at Florida, Dave Aranda, those guys were most decidedly on the hot seat. He'd been 8 and 14 combined in the previous 2 years before last year. He got a decent offense last year and was able to open it up. I don't think that the expectations at Baylor are such that, well, one, let's start with this. The Big 12 is a wide open conference, right? It just is. There is no definitive, decisive year to year front runner. Going into the 2024 season, everybody had Arizona State near or at the bottom of the conference. And look how that turned out, right? You got a good offense, you had a good quarterback, you had Cam Scattaboo, a running back. All you needed was those handful of pieces, and you were good to go. Does Baylor have the pieces to compete? I'm not saying win it because I don't think he has to keep his job. I think he's got to be competitive. He was what 8 and 5 last year, lost the Texas Bowl to LSU. I think he's got to be competitive. I think he's got to win a bowl game, even if it is a third tier bowl game like the Texas Bowl. Um, presumably he's got to get to a better bowl game, but he's got the piece of quarterback. I mean, he's got depth at quarterback. He's got about four quarterbacks on the roster right now, but he's got this kid Sawyer Robertson, who had a good year last year. He was in his third year at Baylor. He's got one more year. Um, he had redshirted 1 year at Mississippi State. He was a 3,000-yard passer last year and had 28 touchdowns, only about, I think, eight interceptions. So he was throwing at about a 63% rate. And he's a good quarterback. You're going to build the offense around him. Um, and you need you need a running game in the Big 12. I don't think there's any question about that. You're not going to sling the ball all over the field all the time. So you need a running game. He's got some depth at running back. Look, if he can go to a 9-win season, maybe 10 wins if you include a bowl game win, I think Aranda is safe. I don't think Baylor is looking to get rid of him. Baylor put a lot of money into him when they handed him the keys after all the, off the field debacle over the years at Baylor. Because Aranda is one of those guys who is going to be squeaky clean. I talked to him at the American Football Coaches Association conference. We were in line at Starbucks, and I was talking to him because he grew up in Southern California and went to Cal Lutheran, and we were talking about that stuff. And I said, I asked him, I said, it seems as though in an arms race of money, especially in the state of Texas for colleges in the state of Texas, that you have what you need to compete. And he said, absolutely. He said, you are never going to hear me complain about the NIL opportunities or anything like that. We have what we need. He said we need to do a better job of talent assessment than what we had done the past 3, 4 years. He said, I think that we're going to be better this year. We've got some guys at the skill positions that I think will really lend well to our offense. And so, I think realistically, again, 9 regular season wins, maybe 10 wins with a bowl game, get a decent bowl game, then I think he's safe.
I agree. I think that you're right. He, just by his admission that one, the Big 12, like you mentioned, is still up in the air. They have no definitive winner where it took Arizona State to get hot late to then make their
Hmm.
run. And it took
Hmm.
not just Arizona hot late, but also took Iowa State to kind of fall back to the wayside. And
Yep.
you had a bad year from Kansas. You had a subpar year from Kansas State. So it's just one of those things that no matter what will happen, no matter what can break right, there's always going to be an opportunity.
Hmm. Yeah, you had BYU fall apart at the end of the season after a hot start. There is no, you can't look at the roster of Big 12 members and think football and say, here's the top and here's everybody else. Here's the top two or three and here's everybody else. You can't do that consistently and have the same teams consistently sitting at the top year to year. There's no way to do it because it just is. I mean, we thought BYU would be better. Colorado turned out better than we thought, but not as good as others. So, and Colorado's got a tremendous drain of talent, that leaves the program after last year. So there's no way to look at it and say that it is a top two or three and then everybody else. The top 6 teams in the conference are going to compete for the top 2 to 3 spots.
Exactly. Now, on the last note, we have Eddie George taking the job at Bowling Green, which
Yes.
is, I can understand why for a couple of reasons. One, the financial situation at Tennessee State, where that athletic program is so far deep in the hole, where
Mhm.
they're kind of not tapped, but they met their ceiling as far as what they can do and what they can spend. And he's going to an FBS team. Mind, yes, it's a group of five, but it's an FBS team in a conference where, with a couple of good recruiting classes, he can make noise. Not a lot of
Hmm.
noise, but he could be competitive in the MAC.
Hmm. Look, I love the hire. I love Eddie George going back to the state of Ohio to coach. I think that's fabulous. I also want to make sure that we, and when I say we, I mean the college football community, do not draw a correlation between Dion leaving an HBCU and going to Colorado and Eddie George leaving an HBCU and going to Bowling Green. This is not about the bright lights and all the bling and everything else that goes with coaching for an FBS school. Because there's no bling at Bowling Green. That ain't happening. This is a grinder job. This is a you got to grind it out every day to be successful. You are not going to see Eddie George be able to be a CEO coach like Dion is, where Dion says, I don't go visit recruits. They want to come to school here. They have to come to me. Eddie George is going to hit the ground because that's what Eddie George does. And that's what you have to do at Bowling Green. There are no automatics. There's no gimme in this. So I want to make sure that we don't take the easy way out and say, oh, yeah, Dion went from an HBCU to an FBS school also. Nope. This is very different. Very different. I like the hire. I think it's terrific. I hope Eddie does well. I had the chance to talk to him a couple of years in a row at the Collegiate Bowl from the NFLPA when he was out there as one of the assistant coaches. And just a terrific guy, very humble. Um, I hope he does well. I hope he does well there. I love seeing the group of fives, the mid majors make this kind of bold hire. And it is bold because he's a big name. And so there's automatically an increase in expectations for what he can and should do and what the program can and should do because you went and got a big name. So it's a bold move, and I hope he does well.
It is definitely a bold move. Like you said, it is a grind job. Having been able to travel through Bowling Green, Ohio,
Mhm.
it is the antithesis of what Boulder or any major college town will be.
Sure.
It is desolate is a word that just forms to mind, and it
Hmm.
is like you said, it's a job where he's gonna have to get his hands dirty often.
Yeah, he's not going to be able to just say, "Hey, I'm Eddie George. The recruits can come see me." That's not going to work, man. He's going to be out at high school games. He's going to, be in parents' houses and kids' houses recruiting. There's going to have to be a lot of old school college recruiting methods that go with this. You'll get some guys from the transfer portal. Here's what I envision Eddie George doing. I think Eddie George, one, is going to understand you're not going to get tons of players through the portal, not to Bowling Green. Although, if you do, you're going to get guys who aren't getting the playing time that they could get or should get at their Power Four school. I think Eddie George is going to get some of those guys. I think Eddie George is going to have to put a re-emphasis on the high school recruiting. That's what you got to do there. And I think Eddie George is going to be pragmatic. And we've talked about this, that I think some of the mid-major programs would do well if the coach would say, look, I know you're going to be here 2 to 3 years. You're going to succeed. You're going to get offers from bigger schools to go into the portal. I get that. Um, we're going to help develop you so you're ready for that. But while you're here, you're going to work hard. I don't think Eddie George is under a delusional process that says, yeah, I got these guys for 4 to 5 years, and here's what we're going to do. Eddie George is going to maximize them for the 2 to 3 years that he does have them. And that includes some significant high school recruiting.
Like that scene in I Love Lucy where she's working in a candy factory and there's a conveyor belt, and Eddie is pretty much
I love that scene
trying to keep things without having to
without
eat,
having to eat the chocolate.
eat the chocolate of all the candy. That's he has to, it's a conveyor belt mentality, and it's smart. He will be able to
Sure.
manage it. What's coming up on Last Word, and how can people interact with you on social media?
Man, can you believe this? We are in spring camp. It has started at many schools. We've got some great work from our guy, Nick Lemkow, who covers the University of Washington. Had some interviews yesterday at Washington's Pro Day and got some interviews with some guys who'll be going on to the NFL, but is also there for the start of camp. And we're doing a lot of that. We're doing a lot of position breakdowns for schools as we start to get into camp and what to expect. I mean, we did one on the quarterbacks at Wake Forest. They have 7 quarterbacks on the spring camp roster. Clearly, you're not going to be going into fall with 7 quarterbacks on the roster. Some
Mm-mm.
guys are going to see where they fare in life as Wake Forest starts camp on Tuesday of next week, and they'll be in somebody else's uniform by the start of fall camp. But in a lot of years where they had a definitive returning starter, it's a wide open race at quarterback for Wake Forest this year. And so, we've got some coverage of that, but a lot of position breakdowns. So they can go to lastwordonsports.com and go to the college football link. They can go to Instagram, they can go to Facebook, they can go to Twitter at Last Word on CFB. They can go to Blue Sky, the same name. They can find me at Tony Bruin on both of those apps.
Tony, as always, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the iDrop Podcast.
All right, man. Be well.